This hour on I-24 News, the Trump administration has announced it will keep the Iran nuclear deal, at least for now.
Senior Palestinian leaders are meeting to discuss the future of possible peace talks with Israel and whether to continue to block any U.S. mediation role.
And reaction is pouring in from around the world to President Trump's profane comments about Haiti, El Salvador, and countries in Africa.
From the I-24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Shayna Estulin.
And because it's Friday, we got Tal Heinrich in for Shannon. Great to have you here as always.
Happy to be here and happy that it's Friday, David.
Indeed, and what a news day this has been. President Trump has decided to keep the Iran nuclear deal going, but he's warning that this will be the last waiver.
3 months ago, the president refused to certify Iran's compliance and urged Congress to come up with new requirements and sanctions. But Congress has done nothing. So Trump White House announced on this day that it would keep the status quo, at least for now.
Let's bring in our senior diplomatic correspondent, Nina Larson. And Nina, we've seen European diplomats urging the president not to abandon the deal. What's been the reaction so far?
Well, we haven't had much reaction worldwide, David, yet. Certainly not an official one from Iran, but Iran was certainly ready for this kind of decision. The Iranian foreign minister was lobbying his European counterparts very, very hard in Brussels yesterday. And also the European bloc was lobbying the United States and has been for quite some time to persuade them to remain in the deal. Now, some officials in Washington didn't like the way that meeting looked yesterday. The whole idea was for the Europeans not only to lobby the U.S. to keep in the deal, but also to pressure Iran about its wider destabilizing activities. But instead, a lot of pictures around the world showed almost a show of unity between Iran and the European bloc. So conversely, now when this decision has been made by the Trump administration, Europe's going to be under extreme pressure after their intense lobbying to stay in the deal to really deliver on their side of things, which is to put more pressure on Iran about its destabilizing activities. And that's where we could see a lot more action back here at the United Nations.
And Nina, in this respect, a new UN report is about to come out on Iran's support of the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Does this impact the Iran deal as a whole?
Yes, it does, Tal. It is related. It might not seem immediately that it is, but this also shows Iran's dealing with proxies in the region, and that's something that Nikki Haley in particular has really been highlighting here at the United Nations. But more importantly, this report that's just coming out, it isn't out officially, it's been leaked, really confirms that Iran has been backing those Houthi rebels and supplying them with very, very heavy armament. If you recall, Nikki Haley gave a very dramatic presser just a few weeks ago where she stood with a backdrop of those missiles that were fired at very audaciously by Houthi rebels at Riyadh airport. She said at the time that Iran was behind it, and this report confirms that.
Nina, regarding the Iranian missile program, never mind, of course, what they may have been shipping over to the Houthis in Yemen, but the overall missile program itself, I understand there's at least some effort at the United Nations to address this, but that the language is vague?
Yes, it's very difficult for them to do this and take greater action at the way that the latest UN resolution that enshrined that overall Iran deal is phrased, David. It says it calls upon Iran not to develop ballistic missiles or deploy them. And that's that's diplomatic language for you, and every word counts. There was a more forceful resolution before that in the Obama era, and that's what Iran wanted out of this resolution, to ultimately agree to that 2015 Iran deal on the nuclear issue. So the ballistic missile program and the transfer of weapons, very much part of the deal. And again, the drama will return to the United Nations.
Nina Larson, our senior diplomatic correspondent, reporting from the UN. Nina, thank you. And we're joined now by Barbara Slavin, director of the Future of the Iran Initiative at the Atlantic Council. And Barbara, what's your reaction to the Trump administration decision?
Well, a little bit of relief, but also concern. Obviously, as you've noted, Trump has said this is the last time that he's going to waive these sanctions, unless the Europeans or Congress somehow unilaterally change the nature of the deal. So it could have been worse. We have the waivers, and I think that's very important. But it means that Europe and others will have to continue to lobby to preserve this agreement.
Barbara, judging by the president's previous threats made to foreign countries, if I'm talking about the Palestinian Authority maybe, or even Pakistan, it seems like he is a man of his word in this regard. And there's a real concern that in 90 days from now, he will nix the deal unless he can fix it. What's the likelihood that the deal could be fixed in your view?
I don't think there's much of a chance that there's going to be any kind of massive renegotiation of this deal, certainly not in 90 days. It took over a decade to get this agreement. So this is simply unrealistic. And the European reaction so far, the EU put out a statement saying they had, quote unquote, taken note of the statement by President Trump today. You know, there may be some efforts to put some more sanctions here or there, or to try to lobby the Iranians to limit their involvement in Yemen or other places. But this deal is not going to be renegotiated. So Trump will have the decision to make. And let's point out, we don't have to wait 90 days. It is within his power to pull the plug on this anytime he wants. These are executive orders that have been waived. So, you know, we don't really need all this drama every 90 days. He will either decide it's in U.S. interest or that it's not.
We've been saying repeatedly, of course, that the nuclear deal is really just focused on the nuclear facilities, that the missile program, the influence across the Middle East, that's different. In your view, though, is it possible that perhaps the soft landing for the Trump administration in the future would be if the Europeans, if the United Nations were to come up with some round of sanctions directly related to those programs that are outside the boundaries of the JCPOA?
Yeah, it's possible. And indeed, the Europeans have said that they would be open to that, but only if the Trump administration continues to implement the nuclear deal. So I think that's a very important distinction. May I also point out that Iran has not tested any ballistic missiles in months. I can't remember the last time. So perhaps all these threats have had some impact already. And also on the human rights front, of course, we had some human rights sanctions today. The Iranians announced recently that they are no longer going to impose the death penalty for minor drug crimes, which is something that the international community has been seeking for several years.
So from an Iranian point of view, just to get things right, do they see these threats or demands made by President Trump as a violation of the deal?
Well, Trump has already violated the spirit of the deal through all of his comments since he took office. The uncertainty that he has cast over the nuclear deal has been a major disincentive to foreign businesses to invest in Iran. And, you know, the bargain the Iranians made was that they would curb their nuclear program. They wouldn't go for a bomb. But in return, they expected that they would have normal trade and commerce with most of the world. So I would argue that Trump is already in violation of the spirit of the deal. And unfortunately, this cloud of uncertainty over the agreement will continue.
Barbara Slavin, Director of the Future of the Iran Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Barbara, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Tal, you almost wonder if the Trump administration finally just sort of realized, as frustrated as they are with all these non-nuclear issues, there's nothing they could really do about them within the parameters of the nuclear agreement.
Yes, according to what Barbara just told us. But I also think she just pointed out to this maybe a deliberate strategy of creating uncertainty once every 90 days, and that might be working for now as well.
Because it freezes Iran.
Could be a strategy itself.
Yeah, it keeps them maybe from testing missiles. Maybe it puts them on notice about supplying weapons to Yemen, and maybe it draws even more attention to their ongoing efforts in Syria.
I'm just wondering if the anti-regime protests in Iran played any kind of role in Trump's decision today. Maybe.
Because that certainly underscored that, I mean, the fear that President Trump has had is that the Obama administration essentially gave Iran billions of dollars because of the sanctions relief. But what everybody has seen, is at least over the last couple of weeks, is that that money didn't flow into Iran in the way that a lot of people thought. And so many people in Iran are upset that the economy isn't better. And maybe that was what convinced President Trump, look, I mean, they're already suffering. It's not as if Iran is, you know, having a great economy and feeling confident right now.
Well, maybe there's another round of protests to come.
Yeah,
who knows?
Absolutely.
People saying that they're not just dying out.
Yeah.
Well,
coming up on Crossroads, senior Palestinian leaders are set to meet this weekend, and they're considering whether to withdraw the PLO's recognition of Israel. We will have the latest details.
Plus, the Leopard is replacing the Puma. No, we're not talking cats here. It's the latest high-tech personnel carrier in one of the world's most advanced militaries. That's ahead. than a month since President Trump formally recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and the Palestinians are still furious. Senior Palestinian leaders will meet this weekend for the first time in 3 years to discuss how to respond to the controversial decision.
The PLO is reportedly considering a possible withdrawal of the organization's recognition of Israel. I-24 News Middle East correspondent Michael Pluchak has the story.
A crucial meeting which could decide the future of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process and of the Palestinian Authority itself. Senior Palestinian leaders will hold 2 days of talks as the Palestinian Central Council, or the PCC, gathers in Ramallah starting Sunday. The aim, to formulate a response to U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Palestinians have already said the announcement means that America can no longer serve as a mediator. It's one of the themes expected to be present in the opening address by President Mahmoud Abbas when he kicks off the meeting. The Palestinian leader is making an all-out effort to garner international support for Palestinian statehood. And that will be high on the agenda of Sunday's meeting.
America has lost its exclusivity and monopoly over the process, and we are looking for a collective responsibility by the international community.
Also up for discussion, repealing the Oslo Accords, dissolving the Palestinian Authority, and declaring Palestine a state under occupation. Another hot topic is potentially halting security coordination between the Palestinian Authority, which controls the West Bank, and Israeli forces. Cutting the long-standing ties would likely give way to violent actors to perpetrate attacks against either Palestinian or Israeli targets. But this is actually old news. Previous Palestinian threats to suspend security coordination or recognition of Israel have not been realized. Last time this council met in 2015, they voted to end security cooperation too.
We initiated today the mechanism for implementing the suspension of all security coordination.
That ruling, however, never became a reality, and critics are skeptical that any of these far-reaching ideas will actually come into play. The main Palestinian Islamist movements, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, who are not members of the PCC, have also been invited to the meetings. Both groups are U.S.-designated terror groups, but both groups also participated in the last meeting some 3 years ago. Michael Pluchak, I-24 News.
For more on that, we're now joined by our Tel Aviv correspondent, Jonathan Regev. Jonathan, with both Hamas and Islamic Jihad invited to this council meeting on Sunday, the Palestinians appear to be more united than ever right now, or is it only aimed at their common enemies, Israel and the U.S.?
United, I would say, on the issue of Jerusalem, yes. On every other possible issue, absolutely not. We're seeing the reconciliation talks, for example, between Fatah, which rules the West Bank, and Hamas, which rules the Gaza Strip. Even on smaller issues in these reconciliation talks, they're unable to reach final agreements, not to mention the bigger issues such as the military wing of Hamas. But when it comes to Jerusalem, we've seen pretty much a united response from the entire Palestinian community, whether it's Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Fatah. So yes, on the question of Jerusalem, there's outrage on all the Palestinian factions. On that, they're united. On the other issues, quite to the contrary.
Jonathan, the Israeli government announced last month it's going to begin trying to deport asylum seekers, and now some activists are calling on Israeli pilots to somehow block that. What's going on?
Yes, first, the issue of asylum seekers is very, very sensitive in Israeli society. And why is that? People are saying, activists are saying, how can the Jewish state, the home of the Jewish people, the people that have suffered from the Holocaust, how can it go and deport people who are running away from the miseries in their country? On the other hand, people are saying that along with these asylum seekers, many of them living in southern Tel Aviv, not far from the place where we are right now, along with poverty and crime, are making the lives of the people living there also a living hell. So within this structure of two things, the Israeli government is trying to maneuver. And yes, those activists are now saying that they're calling for pilots actually not to take place in the deporting of the people. I'm not sure it will really take place, but it shows you how sensitive this issue is within the Israeli society, with both sides taking completely opposing views on this.
Jonathan Regev reporting from our headquarters in the Middle East in Tel Aviv. Jonathan, thank you. Tal, what do you make of the request to get the pilots involved?
I think, just like Jonathan, that it's very unlikely that we'll see an Al pilot, for example, refusing to take refugees or infiltrators, how the Israeli media is referring to them, back to their homes or their countries. It's very unlikely. But El Al pilots, they tend to strike every Monday and Thursday, so maybe they will just protest on this matter as well.
I mean, possible maybe they feel like they've got their hands full with their own labor disputes. Why do they need to take on another activism issue?
This is what I feel about it.
All right. Well, staying in Israel, with the constant threat of terror plots, enemy rockets, and violent riots, the country's military is always looking for new technologies and equipment.
Now the Army has revealed its latest high-tech armored personnel carrier called the Leopard, Namer in Hebrew, David. And it's one of the most formidable vehicles of its kind in the world. I-24 News senior defense correspondent Shai Ben-Ari has the story.
This is the Namer CEV, an advanced armored personnel carrier, specially designed for use by a combat engineering force. The IDF's 603rd Engineering Battalion is the first unit to fully adopt it, transitioning from the older Puma model. A major summarizing exercise was held by the battalion this month, featuring the Namer, which simulated different scenarios. An IDF officer told I-24 News that these scenarios included maneuvers in enemy territory, overcoming physical obstacles, and targeting enemy infrastructure. The Israeli army describes the Namer, developed by Israel Military Industries, as the most secure armored combat vehicle in the world. The Namer CEV has a range of advanced early warning systems, alerting the operator to any objects that can pose a threat up to nearly a mile away. It also carries Rafael's Trophy Active Protection System on board, which intercepts and destroys incoming missiles and rockets. Also available, means for neutralizing hidden explosives and mine-busting rockets. In terms of combat engineering, the vehicle can be attached to bridging equipment, to a bulldozing plate, or even a battering device. The IDF expects the Namer CEV to significantly strengthen its forward operating forces, offering better protection to soldiers involved in the most high-risk combat operations. Shai Ben-Ari, I-24 News.
So interesting to see the way technology is playing a role over there. And you were just reminding me that the Israeli military was essentially tasked with trying to come up with some changes?
The IDF began reviewing vehicles for its ground forces, and it happened after 2014, the Israel-Gaza war operation Protective Edge, after one famous incident there in which an APC, an armored personnel carrier, entered Gaza, the Sujaia neighborhood, for a famous battle that took place there, and it was hit by an RPG missile, and 7 Golani Brigade soldiers were killed, and it was later reported that the APC was from a very, very old model. It was 50 years old.
Wow.
So then after that, they started adding the missile defense systems to the APC, and this is why we're seeing this advanced technology.
Interesting backstory. I just figured it was just because they wanted to be up on the latest technology.
That too. Yeah. Well, still ahead.
Still ahead.
Here on Crossroads. In Syria, thousands of people have been displaced from their homes in Idlib province. The rebel-held area is facing a new round of regime airstrikes.
Plus, President Trump has canceled his trip to open a new U.S. embassy in London, but his wax figure still made an appearance. We'll have all the details. In Syria, thousands of people in rebel-controlled Idlib province have just been displaced from their homes. This follows an intensification of regime airstrikes and new clashes near a military airport.
In recent weeks, government forces have captured several villages with the help of Iran-backed militias and Russian air power. But rebels in the region are fighting back. They've launched a counterattack to try and roll back the government advance.
This new footage shows members of a rebel group affiliated with the Free Syrian Army taking control of a town in Idlib. Idlib is now the largest region still held by the rebels.
Neighboring Turkey, meanwhile, fears another influx of Syrian refugees across the border. So Turkey's prime minister is calling on Russia and Iran to rein in the Syrian army offensive.
Meantime, in Saudi Arabia, women are celebrating. Under a major wave of modern reforms, they are now allowed to enter sports stadiums and watch soccer matches.
But this isn't the only massive breakthrough for women in the ultra-conservative kingdom. I-24 News correspondent Marcus White has the story.
Women line up to enter the King Abdullah Sports Stadium in Jeddah. It's the first time they're allowed to show their support in person for their team. The women are separated from the male-only crowd in what's being called the family section. Allowing women into sports stadiums is Saudi Arabia's first move this year, expanding women's rights. Women in Saudi Arabia also gathered at the nation's first car exhibition aimed at women. The event comes a few months after King Salman issued a royal decree allowing women to drive starting this June. Women at the exhibition were happy to get a glimpse of what it's like behind the wheel of a car.
My interest in cars started a long time ago, of course. I hope to purchase a car in the near future, God willing.
Women will also be allowed to apply for a license, take driving lessons, and drive vehicles without getting legal permission from a male guardian. Saudi Arabia has seen a number of social and economic reforms lately aimed at reducing the country's dependence on oil for revenue. Saudi Arabia held its first Comic-Con event last February without female segregation. Even though women soon will be able to drive themselves to events like Comic-Con, they're still in the back seat when it comes to a number of other freedoms. The kingdom's policies still limit what women can do without a male guardian. A woman's husband, father, brother, or son are considered a guardian. A July 2017 report by advocacy group Human Rights Watch outlines what else women cannot do without a male guardian. Women cannot marry or divorce. They can also not have custody of children after a divorce, after the children reach the age of 7 for boys and 9 for girls. They cannot get a passport, travel abroad without male consent. There are few careers in which Saudi women can get a job without male permission. Women also need a guardian to open a bank account, leave prison, and get a fair trial. The U.S. State Department points out that the testimony of a Saudi man is the equivalent of the testimony of 2 Saudi women. Women also can't get certain medical treatments, including some life-saving procedures. They can't receive equal inheritance. There are also limits as to how women dress and interact with men.
Marcus White with that report, and he joins us now in studio with more. So clearly, as he pointed out, some incredible inequality, some major setbacks and hurdles that women still face. But as far as the changes, the opportunities, what's been the reaction across Saudi Arabia?
Well, of course, the ultra-conservative have their stance, and they're not happy with this. There have been some reports that there have been up to about 50,000 tweets talking about women being allowed to attend soccer matches today, and a lot of negativity from that, believing that women's place is in the home, that they should be praying, that they should be with their children instead of at a soccer match where men are yelling and doing various other things that men tend to do at soccer matches.
But still, they're only allowed to sit in the family section, meaning that if you're a single Saudi woman, you can't enter a stadium. I think, no, seriously, that's the case. Marcus, what's being seen as the driving force behind all the changes that we see there in society?
Well, the driving force is the Crown Prince, who is expected to take the throne. He's 32 years old, Prince bin Salman, and it's believed that he really is trying to lead this revolution and lead this change because the population in Saudi Arabia is a lot of people under the age of 25. Also, the economy over there just really in a state where there's a lot of concern because the country is expected to run out of oil. So it's believed that these changes aren't happening because the administration is being nice. It's believed that these changes are happening because the kingdom is deciding that they want to go ahead and make these decisions to stabilize the economy, because you figure if you have women attending soccer matches and women at these events, it's also going to boost the economy. And also women driving cars that can help as well. And I understand that there are now ride-hailing apps that have started recruiting Saudi women? There's one ride-hailing app called Kareem. They hope to have 10,000 female drivers by June when women are allowed to be behind the wheel of a car.
Uber, get taxi.
Basically, the Saudi version of
Will
Uber.
they be allowed to pick up male customers?
You know what? I have not seen any reports about that, but certainly a very interesting question. But I'm sure that women are looking forward to being behind the wheel of an Uber. They have to go through training just like anybody else, and look forward to seeing more about that.
By the way, I read that police officers now need to learn how to interact with female drivers because it's something that they haven't been doing with Saudi drivers for a while.
Indeed, I saw something similar. Very
remarkable changes. I-24 News correspondent Marcus White. Marcus, thanks as always. We appreciate it. All right, so just ahead, it was about this time on Thursday when President Trump, well, when the news came out that President Trump had referred to El Salvador, Haiti, and countries in Africa as countries that were, well, rhymes with spit holes. My view on this call has changed a little bit. Initially with Shayna, I was like, oh, this is just Donald Trump. He's just saying his usual, crazy stuff. But then we came out and learned that, well, he said, well, no, we need immigrants from Norway, which is white and European, not from these particular countries. And I thought, okay, well, now there's an element of racism that seemed to be fueling all of this.
Interesting. We will talk about it.
We are going to talk about this.
We're talking about it a lot in the next segment, not only with you, but also we have guests, interesting guests to talk about this. I'm just wondering if you go downstairs here in Times Square and conduct an anonymous survey, where would you like your immigrants to come from? What if the results will be much different? I don't know.
That's a great point, and I think
and we will bring it up.
And there are a lot of people probably don't want to say quietly they agree with President Trump. Anyway, lots to come on Crossroads on I-24 News. We'll be back after our headlines in Tel Aviv after this. Welcome back to Crossroads in Washington, D.C. and around the globe. This has been a day of very intense reaction to President Trump's vulgar description of El Salvador, Haiti, and countries in Africa. But the president is denying that he used the specific term that rhymes with spit hole.
On Twitter, Mr. Trump is only admitting the language he used during a closed-door meeting on an immigration deal was tough. Several U.S. Democratic and Republican lawmakers have criticized his comments, calling them divisive and unacceptable. Correspondent Kenneth Mutton has more.
President Trump honoring the man who called for racial justice.
We are all created equal by God.
The president signed an MLK Day proclamation, but ignored questions about his reported use of an offensive term during an Oval Office meeting with congressional leaders. Multiple sources tell ABC News the president was angry when he was told a possible deal on immigration would include protections for immigrants from African countries and Haiti, reportedly saying, why are we having all these people from expletive countries come here? Trump did tweet Friday morning his language was tough, but, quote, this was not the language used. Another tweet never said anything derogatory about Haitians, other than Haiti is obviously a very poor and troubled country. Never said take them out, made up by Dems. The one Democrat in that Oval Office meeting on that denial.
It is not true. He said these hate-filled things, and he said them repeatedly. It was a heartbreaking moment.
Republicans Tom Cotton and David Perdue, also in the room, said in a statement, we do not recall the president saying these comments specifically. Other lawmakers condemning the alleged remarks many have called racist.
Norway is a great customer and a great ally.
Sources say Trump suggested the U.S. should bring in more immigrants from countries like Norway. House Speaker Paul Ryan called the comments unfortunate and unhelpful.
And I think it's a big part of our strength. Whether you're coming from Haiti, we've got great friends from Africa in Janesville who are doctors who are just incredible citizens.
And that was Kenneth Moten reporting.
Let's bring in senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv to discuss it further. Dan, as we report for a second day now on President Trump's use of vulgarity, we'll call it like this, to show what he really thinks about certain foreign countries that immigrants come from, is there any lasting impact, or is this story just going to blow over soon?
We've been asking around Washington, Tal, and it depends what your politics are. Many Republicans absolutely admit that Trump's use of foul language is embarrassing, and they agree that saying basically that poor countries are crap holes is an insult, but they say it's not fair to conclude that Donald Trump is a racist. On the other hand, Democrats, including Senator Dick Durbin, who was there, they say it's important to expose President Trump for what he is. Now, probably some other controversy will push this aside, probably sometime soon, though we don't know what it'll be. David and Tal.
Dan, the meeting, as you've been pointing out, was about, well, it was with members of Congress to talk about immigration reform and where it goes next. What's the latest on that?
Well, the use of a dirty word certainly didn't help. It caused more bitterness between the two sides. And President Trump is also accusing Republicans of being too soft on immigration. He says the deal that they were making with Democrats would open the U.S. to large numbers of people from high crime countries, as he put it when he was being polite. He does say that he still would like to extend the protected status for the so-called Dreamers, that act called DACA, that's supposed to expire in March, but only if there is a deal for more border security and the Democrats have to agree to finance a wall on the Mexican border. David and Tal.
And briefly, Dan, President Trump has canceled plans for a visit to London next month. What was that?
Yeah, it turns out he was going to go. British and U.S. officials were arranging for a quick visit for him to cut the ribbon to dedicate a new United States embassy in London, but south of the river, kind of an off location, as Trump called it when he announced that I'm canceling the trip. It's a bad building, wasteful, $1.2 billion in an off location. We had a great embassy in a fine location, and he said the Obama administration sold it for peanuts. Now, actually, the deal was made by the George W. Bush administration, and also, actually, the reason is more likely it was clear that British people who can't stand Donald Trump were going to protest his visit in great numbers. The mayor of London is celebrating what they consider a victory, that Trump now knows that the visit would not have gone well. Either way, Trump's not going to London, not next month. David and Tal.
And by the way, Dan, we're looking at a video of the wax figure from Madame Tussauds Museum in London that I guess was placed outside that new embassy. Is this the sort of thing that the president at the Trump White House would like? That he sees it, oh, they're making an image of me, or that he gets angry by this?
If he had shown up and been in a good mood, like he liked the building, he liked the event, and there were not protesters, he probably would have had some fun with the wax figure. But as things are now, he's kind of bitter about lots of things, including, so he says, the wasteful U.S. embassy that'll open soon in the British capital.
And maybe he even thought that it was a crappy artist rendition. Who knows? Dan Raviv, our senior Washington correspondent. Dan, thank you. To discuss the president's immigration comments, let's bring in Ted Harvey, chairman of the Committee to Defend the President. Ted, what do you make of the president? Good evening. What's your reaction to the president's
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. What's your reaction to the president's vulgar description of El Salvador, Haiti, and countries in Africa?
Well, one, I wasn't in the room. I didn't hear it, and he says he didn't say it. And the two Republican senators that were in the room say that he didn't say
let me stop you right there, because there were more Republicans who were in the room. There were more Republicans who were in the room, including Senator Lindsey Graham, who by all accounts criticized the president right then and there for using the term.
Well, again, I wasn't in the room. The president says he didn't say it, and two other Republican senators say that he didn't say it.
All right, so Senator Graham's a liar?
I am going to, is Senator Graham a liar? I wasn't in the room. I have no idea what was said. But the fact is that the people that are in those countries are beautiful people, yet their socialist governments have created countries that their people are fleeing from in droves to try to come to this country that is the most exceptional country on the face of the earth, because we are a country that believes in the rule of law. We are a country that believes in capitalism and allowing people to achieve their greatest dreams, as opposed to the countries that they are running away from. I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough to remember the Vietnamese boat people. I'm old enough to remember the Cuban boat people. I'm old enough to remember the Berlin Wall. Those people weren't running away from beautiful democratic bastions of freedom. They were running away from societies that, as Ronald Reagan would say, need to be on the ash heap of history. Was Donald Trump not as eloquent as Ronald Reagan? Probably not. Definitely not. I worked for Ronald Reagan. But yes, they are socialist countries that are backwards in every respect for when it comes to providing freedom and liberty for their people.
Wait, if the president did use the certain language that we don't want to bring up once again, don't you think it's some sort of a diplomatic blow to U.S. foreign relations?
Well, he said it in a closed room meeting negotiating whatever he said. He said it in a closed room meeting negotiating with Congress people. He wasn't saying it openly to the world. He was in a very heated discussion about one of the most important legislative discussions going forward right now. And he's a New Yorker. Did he use colorful language? I don't know. But I do know that the countries these people are running away from in droves to try to escape, they don't want to be there.
Well,
So,
look, it is a fair point, and it's a great point to point out that the president was saying something in private. He did not expect that this would be transmitted around the world, but according to all accounts, and let's put aside whether he used the word or not, he did say, according to even all the Republicans, that yes, we should have more immigrants from Norway and fewer immigrants from Africa, El Salvador, and Haiti, where they are brown or black. Is that racism?
Well, I think that he would also say that we should be fighting against having people come here in droves from Mexico. We should have people stop coming here in droves from the Soviet Union during the fall of the Soviet Union.
Norway is even more socialist in many ways than Mexico. So if that's your measure, then we shouldn't have people from Norway. The difference is that people in Norway are white European. The people from Mexico, El Salvador, Haiti, and Africa are not whites.
I don't believe he was talking about the individual people. I think he was talking about the countries and that they are coming from, not the individual.
But if he's so opposed to socialism, why would he want people from Norway?
I can't speak for the president on what he said in that meeting. I was not there. But I do know that the people are running away from socialist countries in Haiti, in Cuba, in El Salvador, in Africa. They are all socialist countries that are going into disrepair because
for the
of
record,
failed
not all countries in
ideology.
Africa are socialist, but
I just wanted to tell you, David, that I don't see Norway as a socialist country.
Really,
it's a very
with their healthcare system and all their social
it's a very capitalistic free country. They have many capitalistic systems, and yeah.
All right, fair point.
We can discuss that on some other.
Paul and I will fight after you and I, Ted, are done.
Me.
I'm defending Norway. I don't think
You're
that
not
people.
defending Ted?
Well, to Ted's point, I think you know what I told you before, David, is that if we were to conduct a random survey promising anonymity here downstairs in the middle of Times Square, asking people, American people, would you rather allow in this country immigrants from African countries, the Middle East, or European countries? I don't know if the outcome of such a survey will contradict the president's remarks. Of course, the language is something totally different, but...
Tad, what do you make of that? Would you agree with that? That if you pull people aside and they're not on camera, not on the record, they probably would say, no, we don't want people from certain countries?
No, I don't believe that. I believe that America is open and loving, and they would accept any individual that wants to come here legally. And that is what most of this discussion about DACA is. This is what most of the discussion is about building the wall, is treating all immigrants from all over the world the same, that they come here legally and go through all of our laws and legal hoops that you have to go to immigrate, to migrate to our country, and don't break the laws. That is what this is about. And the Democrats have blown this up into something that is a distraction from what the true discussion is.
Fair. It's a fair argument. But to be clear, the discussion about the Haitians, the reason that they're trying to carve out an exception for Haiti is because of all of these earthquakes and natural disasters they have had.
No, I disagree with that.
No,
I disagree with that. My brother is a lifelong Foreign Service officer who was stationed in Haiti 30 years ago. He was there after the fall of Aristide, and we had to come in there with dump trucks and the U.S. Army and clean up all of the trash that was on the streets. And we told them we will do this.
That was 30 years ago. In the last 10 years, we've had two major earthquakes.
Nothing has changed. And all of these people keep trying to come here.
Ted, the reason they're coming for the last 10 years. No, the reason they're coming for the last 10 years is because their homes were destroyed by earthquakes.
I have a long-term historic knowledge about this country. They've been coming here for years. Yes, they had terrible earthquakes and hurricanes, but they also had a terrible socialist government that people were running away from 30 years ago. You can't just look at it in this one little time capsule.
Except if you look at it in this little time capsule, you find that more people left Haiti because of the earthquakes and the mudslides and all the natural disasters than ever left because of their socialist government. In any case, Ted Harvey, you're a great debater. We love having you on I-24 News. Chairman of the Committee to Defend the President, and he does it well. Ted Harvey, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
God bless you guys. Take care.
That was an interesting one, a very interesting one.
Do you think, I mean, what'd you make of Ted's last point? No, it's because of just socialism that's why people are coming to the United States. It's not because of anything else.
I don't know. There's a different kind of definition here, I find, to socialism. You said Norway was socialist. Bernie Sanders called Denmark socialist country, and then the people of Denmark said, no, we're not a socialist country back then in the presidential race. Anyway, well, there's more still to come on Crossroads. We can't promise you more heated debate like this one, but that's including the latest on the deadly mudslides in Southern California. Rescuers are continuing their desperate search for 5 people that remain missing. We'll have all the details.
Plus, the United States is struggling through an unusually severe flu epidemic. It's now spread to every state except Hawaii. More on that ahead. The grueling search and rescue efforts have continued into a 4th day in California, with authorities desperately working to try to find the 5 people that are still missing after this week's deadly mudslides. Those mudslides killed 17 people.
The number of emergency workers on the ground there has doubled since yesterday. Now more than 1,200 are searching for people still trapped, even combing several areas for a second time in the hope of finding victims. Correspondent Marcy Gonzalez has the latest.
Through unrecognizable wastelands of what used to be neighborhoods.
The house just right there that I know my kids used to play with those kids, and the house, there's no sign of the house. It's not even there.
The ongoing relentless search for survivors of Tuesday's mudslides here in Southern California.
We know that window's closing, but we really are doing our best to search and rescue. And you've heard those stories from around the world where people have been missing for 8 days, 9 days, and they were found alive.
With that optimism fading, crews clearing mud from homes and businesses, including here at the historic Montecito Inn, built by Charlie Chaplin in 1928, moving forward with a grim awareness.
The fire department keeps coming in and checking on us, and we're supposed to call them if we find any bodies.
Already 17 people are confirmed dead, the youngest just 3 years old.
It's hurting all of us. It's very heartbreaking.
And many who made it through the deluge of mud, debris, and massive boulders have spent days trapped in their homes with no power and no running water. With those issues, nearly the entire town is now under mandatory evacuation orders.
This is the worst thing I've ever seen.
Wow. And that was Marcy Gonzalez reporting.
Meantime, California is also struggling through an extremely severe flu season. The number of deaths in the state has increased by more than 20% from the same time last year.
And it's not just in California. Health officials say that it's reached almost every corner of the United States and has now hit a deadly peak. Elizabeth Herr has that story.
The flu reaching epidemic proportions, with 49 states now reporting widespread flu activity. That announcement from the CDC, the agency also stressing the most vulnerable groups remain people over the age of 65 and children younger than 5, because their immune systems are not as developed as those of older children.
Everything in sight that kids touch.
In Idaho, the situation so dire, cleaning crews are working overtime after an entire school district shut down this week. In North Carolina, this school also forced to close after 160 students got sick.
Kids love to share pencils, they love to share toys, but when that happens, you're going to have a lot of germ interaction as well.
So doctors say to keep the virus away, wash your hands often and carefully. And if you haven't, get those flu shots. Also, if you are feeling sick, don't assume it's too late to fight the bug with antiviral drugs like Tamiflu.
You've heard us in the past say they only work in the first 48 hours. New data out of the CDC suggests that is not true. There is particularly a survival benefit in higher risk patients if given after that 2-day window.
Oh, interesting.
So treatment should not be withheld just because you're at 49 hours.
And that was Elizabeth Herr reporting.
David, Happy New Year.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It wasn't only 2 weeks ago, but I'll tell you right after a short break why we're celebrating today as well.
Awesome. So tell what's with the belated New Year's wishes?
You might think we are in 2018, David, but according to the Berber calendar, this year, today, we're marking year 2968. Yes. The Berbers, if you're not familiar with this community, are North Africa's indigenous inhabitants. They are descendants of pro-Arab populations in North Africa, and you can find them in many countries, mostly in Morocco, but also in Algeria, in Tunisia, Libya, and Western Egypt. Morocco is the country with the largest Berber community.
And they look like they're celebrating their New Year's. Do they use champagne or something that we would call burbly?
I'm not sure, but these are celebrations from Algeria that for the first time recognized the Berber New Year's as a national holiday, and that's exciting, David.
Happy New Year, Berbers. That does it for this hour of Crossroads. The news continues on I-24 News after this.